Greetings, this is Artie from Artifact. This video, I wasn't going to make this video because I wasn't going to subject anybody to watching yet another TV repair, but I decided to do this after the fact video to show you what can happen when you get careless doing a repair. This TV didn't cost anything. I was leaving a consultant's job late one night, and it was in a small office building, and I couldn't get out of the building because the front doors were locked. And so I had to go to the servants' entrance in the back, which was a one-way door, and right next to that door sat this. It was really dusty, but there was a piece of paper taped to the screen. It said, "Free to a good home." It's an analog TV. It's combo, has a DVD player in it too. The DVD player isn't that interesting, but I'm always interested in analog TVs because they give vintage video games that authentic look with everything artifacting and bleeding into each other. So, as I may have implied, this is not a live video because I wasn't going to do a video on this, but a couple of interesting things happened while I went through this. And I'll kind of show you after the fact what those interesting things were. It's a 13-inch CRT, and so I brought this thing home. I brought it up on the Variac. Picture came up, identified it as being in DVD mode. I couldn't find a DVD. I opened the tray, put in a DVD, and ran it, and it ran perfectly fine. So, well, needed some cleaning up. I also tried the auxiliary inputs. It has a composite video and sound input, and that also worked. So, yeah, clean it up, put it aside, and it'll come in real useful someday. So I cleaned it up a little bit, and then I wanted to release the DVD, and this door kind of partially opened. It made some grinding noises, and that was that. So something had to be fixed. The TV tray wouldn't move, and so I figured I'd have a look at that. So a few screws later, we were inside, and the back cover just came off. I almost ripped out the speaker connector over here, which is attached to the back cover, but everything went fine. Just your regular TV stuff in here. Tuner. I think this is the brains over here. It is microprocessor controlled. And the DVD electronics and the DVD mechanism over here. And yeah, that's about it. So in order to have a look at the DVD mechanism, I had to obviously remove the mechanism from here, and in order to do that, the chassis had to come out, and the chassis was just loosely inserted in here. It's actually not attached by anything. I think the back cover holds it into place, but there were a bunch of cables that I had to disconnect, and that's when the trouble started. Decided to get rid of this zip tie over here. It's got the high voltage wire and 2 voltage wires going from the flyback to the neck board over here, and I had to cut these. Actually, I didn't even have to cut these, but at the time I thought that, hey, it'll give me some more playroom. So I went in there and I cut the zip tie, and I messed up because I didn't pay attention, and I cut one of the wires. Now, fortunately, that wasn't the HV wire, but rather, I don't know if you can see it, it was one of the wires going to the neck tube over here, and that got fixed. Well, that got fixed later on, but anyway, that got cut. It wasn't a big deal. You just If it was the high voltage wire, it would have been a bit of a problem, but since it was this one, which doesn't have that high of a voltage in it, if you keep the metal parts really short, the wire, and solder them together and put a couple layers of shrink wrap on it, you're usually good. And that's what I ended up doing eventually. But anyway, after that I was able to pull out the whole chassis, and don't forget to discharge the anode over here before pulling it out. And don't do this at home, it's dangerous. You can get a shock, you can be in pain, you can die, you can set your house on fire. So don't do this at home. You know, let the idiot do it. Let me do it, and you can just sit back and watch it, danger free. But over here you can see the DVD mechanism, and I mean, I took this thing out. It was a protracted job to get it out and remove the screws and get the mechanism out. One of the problems here is that this mechanism doesn't even have a case. It's open to the elements. So basically the read-write, the laser is right over here, and it's not even enclosed in anything, so it's very easy to get that dirty. And that was basically what the problem was. The mechanism that slid the tray forward was, the gears in there were really gummed up. And I pretty much cleaned things out, re-lubricated them, and it worked great. I mean, manually it worked great, but of course I'd have to put the whole thing back together in order to test it. I put everything back together with no screws left over. Fixed this wire over here. As I mentioned before, I just stripped both ends. Very short piece of wire coming out, tinned them, soldered them together, and put 2 layers of shrink tubing on top of them. And it's a nice clean connection over here. Shouldn't spark, shouldn't be a problem. And then I turned the whole thing around, plugged it in order to see if my DVD fix worked. And I plugged it in, and immediately upon plugging it in, I could hear the degaussing circuit kick in. And then I hit the power switch and nothing happened. The TV would no longer turn on. I checked all the connections, I reseated all the connections and everything, and nope, the TV wouldn't come on. The only thing I could make happen is if I unplugged it from the AC outlet and waited for a few minutes and then plugged it back in, I could hear the buzz of the degausser coming on very briefly, and then nothing. The unit was just dead. So what does all of this mean? I could not find a schematics for this, or anything like it. Well, anything like it I'm sure I could, but what I ended up using was, I have the schematic for the 8-inch Sony TV I did a few episodes back, and just to use it as a reference, and looking at the traces on the board, what it looked like was that the AC came in on the the TV is a Magnavox, by the way, on the Magnavox, and right after the AC comes in and goes through a fuse, it would enter a TEMCO, a temperature-controlled resistor, that in turn drove the degaussing coil. And the way that works is when the TEMCO is cold, it has really low resistance and passes current really well, but as current flows, it warms up, and then it hits a certain temperature, and it shuts off. And so it gives a squirt to the degaussing coil that's wrapped around the screen, and that gets rid of any magnetic impurities and makes sure that you don't have weird spots on the screen. So in my case, after looking at it, that explained that I was getting AC power, the fuse was good, and it was enough to fire off the degaussing coil. But then after that, the AC goes through an isolating transformer, a 1-to-1 transformer, and then starts generating the voltages needed for the rest of the TV. And things diverge greatly now from the Magnavox to this schematic, but really what happens later on, it goes through something similar to this, where the input voltage, where you have a switching power supply and the input voltage is basically converted to generate the necessary voltages for the rest of the circuit. But to me it looked like there wasn't really anything happening. There wasn't anything coming out of this transformer over here. It wasn't generating any of the proper voltages for the rest of the TV to work. So what did I do? I don't know. And that's basically what was up to me to find out. Probably some of you may say, hey, why did you bother? You should have just put it back together and taken it back to where you found it. But hey, it's a challenge. And I had to figure out where I messed up. Looking at the traces, I just followed things through and saw, unfortunately, the board markings, they were very good at telling me the hot side and the cold side of things. But most of the reference designators were just that, reference designators. They did not say, they didn't talk about voltages or anything. Not that I could see. And I did some measuring. I saw that the 120 volts was passing the smoothing capacitors over here and getting to the full wave rectifier made out of discretes. And that was going to the primary side of the main transformer. And then here was a secondary side, but I really didn't know what to look for. So, spending quite a lot of time looking at this thing, I did find a line. Let's see if I can find that again. And it was a line over here that said, where was it? Anyway, I saw a trace, it was somewhere around here, that said 33 volts on it. It's too small for you to see that from here, but it was like one of the only traces or only voltage points that was actually marked. And by the way, for reference, this is basically the connections to the brains, to the processor, which is sitting here, back here, and this is the tuner back here. But I took out my meter and I measured the point that said 33 volts, and at first it gave me 62 volts. Ouch. But then I figured out that I was using the wrong ground reference, because the 33 volts needed a reference from the secondary side of the first transformer over here. So I found a ground over here, and no, I didn't guess, it was actually marked, but I don't know where they are anymore. I can't exactly point it out, not that it's that interesting, but when I measured the 33 volts marked to the ground, to the proper ground reference over here, I got about 2.5 volts out of it. Well, so either the board was lying or some defect had cropped up. You can kind of see it if you squint, but it does say 33 volts right over here. And I can't get closer because the stupid camera won't focus. And so what I did was I went in and I traced the 33 volt line to seem to originate somewhere over here. And I measured it, and it was still sitting at around 2.5 volts. So I thought, well, let's see what kind of components are on the other side, because again, there's a lot of component designators in here, but it's really not giving me any other voltage references or anything that I can use to further troubleshoot this. So I thought, hey, let's look at the other side. And I've already spent about an hour and a half just looking at the board, measuring a few things, and to no avail. So here's the component side of the board, and this is the affected area where the 33 volts is originating from, around here somewhere. Here's the transformer. And I checked for melted components, cracked components, components emitting evil-smelling liquids. Nothing. Did some quick checks on some of the more obvious things, like the resistor over here, and everything just seemed to look okay. But sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. And what I saw, and unfortunately I don't have a picture of it, but there's a solder blob sitting on top of these three jumpers, shorting these three jumpers together. And the solder blob was about the size of the top of this transistor, a little bit wider, just enough to very neatly, in a very nice round shape, short these three lines out. And that's sitting in the switching supply. Now, it didn't blow a fuse, but there is a fuse over here. It's sitting right on the primary, so I guess whatever short this caused wasn't bad enough to have a lot of current flow, but it obviously was bad enough to have no current flow at all, because I shorted out three lines in the switching supply. And well, you ask, how did this happen? And here you go. So basically, these wires with the zip tie removed were kind of hanging over here, and I made the repair right here. I stripped the cut wires at both ends, soldered them, and put the heat shrink tubing on them. And that's pretty much in the line of sight of these three jumpers over here. So I didn't pay attention, I used too much solder, whatever. A blob dripped down and hit right on the center jumper over there. Let's see how much closer I can get to that, because you can still kind of see. Come on. See, you can still kind of see bits and pieces of solder stuck over here. That's basically where the blob was. I mean, I took some solder wick, stuck the iron in there, and removed it, and then made sure that they were no longer shorted to each other. And, well, then it was time to see if that would let the switcher come back up again and power on the TV. So then it came time to test my handiwork. I mean, I didn't even go in there to measure any voltages. I just brought it up on the variac, and that's why I'm not going to bring it up on the variac now, but plug it into the wall, and let's see if you can hear. So that buzz you heard, hopefully, was the degaussing coil being energized very briefly. And that proves the whole theory, not theory, I mean I could see it, that the minute you plug this thing into power, the degaussing coil comes on. So it's not connected to the power switch, but rather it waits for every time you plug it into the wall, it runs a degauss cycle. So things didn't come on. So then it was time to hit the power switch. I heard the horizontal frequency. And the TV was back. Has a pretty nice picture. Let's see. I am adjusting the focus as best as I can over here, and getting rid a little bit. It looks a little bit too bright, so this looks a little better. So it has a nice picture. And so now, of course, for the big test, for the thing that I actually fixed, and that was the DVD tray. So here's the open tray button, and works like magic. And does it still play DVDs? Let me go find one. Okay, found one. So let's see if it plays. Can you hear the motor whirring? Oh, it found it. And there you go. Of course, you hear no sound because I've unplugged the speaker is in the back cover, and that's sitting somewhere else. And I better not play this for too long, because even though this is like a preview, I don't know if you get nailed for that. So, oh, let's see if the tray still opens. It sure does. So all of that is fixed, which is nice. So the next thing to do is to have a look at, remember the main purpose for me getting this was to have an analog TV to look at the vintage video games. So what we'll test it with is this all-in-one type TV game. Sound, video. Of course, we got to switch it now to the auxiliary input, and off we go. Yeah, if there's no sound, I'm going to have to put it back together again, but as you can see, has a nice display. The camera makes it look a little nicer. It looks a bit oversaturated to me, looking at it straight. The colors are really saturated, and I can't really find a control in there to set the color or the saturation. But then I went ahead and proceeded to put it back together again. So the only physical control or adjustment I found inside was for the vertical height that I can slightly adjust, but nothing else. So I guess everything else is done through the soft controls. And as you can see, you know, they have a wonderful economy with buttons here. So it is assumed that you have a remote for it, which it didn't come with one. So I took a universal remote like this and punched in a Magnavox code, and some of the commands work, but I think the ones that I really need is going into the menu and doing picture adjustments. I couldn't get to that. So if we try that again, so there's an input setup button over here. Let's see if we press setup. So it wants to channel setup. I don't want it to go channel searching either, but just for grins, what happens if I click channel setup? Cable TV takes approximately 50 minutes. Thank you very much. So if I exit from this, and we're back there, but I can't, there's a menu button, but that doesn't work on here. And I bet you if I had a remote that let me get into the menu, I could adjust color saturation and brightness and everything. Even though I've done a general adjustment on the flyback already, I've gotten good focus out of it, but there's just the colors are, yeah, the colors are just a bit too much over here. So I think in terms for that to work, I would actually have to find a remote. And one thing I did find online for this is the manual, one of those manual pages where that'll let you read the manuals page by page. And it specifically said do not use a universal remote control because it will not allow you all of the functionality that you need to utilize this correctly. So anyway, let's put it back together so we can see what this thing is like with sound. Okay, it's all back together. The speaker's connected. This time when I plugged it in, I did not hear the degaussing coil. But let's see. Oh, that's why I didn't hear it, because the outlet wasn't turned on. There you go. Okay, came on. Now one thing I noticed, it kind of has a mind of its own when it gets to what mode it wakes up in. So the last time I turned it on, it woke up in the DVD mode, and obviously it's waking up in the setup mode here. And I've played with this, and it just totally insists on you scanning for channels. Since I don't have an antenna plugged in, I don't have anything convenient near the workbench. It sits there and scans for a while and then comes back and says no channels found. And the manual, the user manual, actually says it'll keep doing that until you have at least one good TV channel. And I guess I could take this upstairs and hook it up to a live antenna and have it scan the channels and all of that, but that's not interesting. All I need a way to get out of here, because none of the buttons in front, like the selection button, oh, that's the configuration button. Yeah, see, now it goes into the scanning mode when you hit that button, and then you got to sit there just to be told that, sorry, but there's nothing I can do. So what needs to be done here is we need to power cycle it. And I think I found a way to bypass that. And the way I do that is there is a button marked both input and setup on the remote. And when I hit that, it goes to the non-existent channel 2. And then I have to hit the select button in front, and it goes to the auxiliary input. And now it finally is an analog monitor. Power switch, you have to move left, okay. And we have volume. Can we adjust the volume? No. No, it won't even let me adjust the volume. Well. No. Oh, that didn't work right. I did the same thing again. What am I supposed to? I think I'm supposed to pick up all the little items here. Well, there's a safe. Yeah, I actually managed to finish the first level. And so on and so forth. So, it's a nice analog monitor, but I'm not sure whether I want to go through all of that setup stuff. So, I think the final verdict on this is it's a nice analog monitor, but the only way I'm going to be able to use this properly is if I get one of the original remote controls. And you can get them for about on the neighborhood of $10 on eBay, but I'm not sure I want to invest anything more in this monitor. So I'll probably keep it around until somebody asks me if I have an extra analog monitor, and I tell them, yeah, I have one. It looks pretty good, but you need a remote, and otherwise you need to go through all this rigmarole to turn this thing on. Okay, thank you. So it has all sorts of neat games on here, and the screen actually does look pretty nice. But anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this and learned a little lesson about being careful when you repair something as not to cause yourself more problems. This problem probably cost me about 2 hours, and but it just taught me another lesson again. When you're soldering anything in the air around a circuit board, use very thin solder, use very little solder, and pay attention to what it is you're doing. Well, leave me a comment if you have any better ideas of what you think I should do with this thing. Leave me a thumbs up, because that supports the channel. And again, have a good one, and we'll see you next time.